Tyler Groff. Dr. Tyler Groff is speaking today, and give it up for him. He's a man who loves Jesus and loves the Word.
Am I on this morning? Can you hear me? Am I good? Okay. Hey, a lot happened this morning. It's great to see so many of you this morning. And I'm already going to go longer than I thought because I just feel God's Spirit in me. You know, Orlando has been affected by men, particularly pastors, who flamed out, who didn't finish well. And I know he knows this, but it's by the grace of God. Pastor Pete continues faithfully with character and integrity to week after week be here to show up for each of us. And I think, as Scripture says, give honor to him, honor is due. I think this morning, if we would we say thank you to Pastor Pete and all he does. We have been in this Kingdom Warrior Disciplines series. And I don't know about you, but Pete's been dropping some truth bombs all over the place. One that's been sticking with me for the last couple of weeks is we are God's man wherever we are. That's just been sticking with where I've been thinking about that. I'm God's man when I'm at work. What does that mean? To be compassionate but direct. What's it mean to be tough but tender? I've been thinking about that when I come home after a long day. I'm mentally exhausted. Maybe you're mentally exhausted at the end of your day, physically exhausted, and you come home to a family or a spouse. You come home to somebody, and they're waiting for you, and they're wanting your energy. And to be God's man where I am, it means they don't get the leftovers. I think about it as my wife in our house. I was telling somebody I'm a night owl, so this is incredibly god-awful early to be speaking this morning. But my wife goes to sleep usually before me. What does it mean to be God's man wherever I am? What happens after my wife goes to bed? What gets my attention? What gets your attention? So he's been dropping those little bombs. We are a disciple, not a dabbler. And we need more disciples of Jesus in our culture and in our day, men who lean in to these disciplines that God gives us. And then he gave me a truth bomb that just spoke to my soul the other week. I felt like somebody saw me. He said this: coffee is a vitamin, not a stimulant. And I'm Presbyterian, but if you want to say amen this morning, I welcome it to that. I have a question for you as we begin. You get word there's somebody who's going to be passing through town, highly respected, highly acclaimed in their field. And you, maybe through work, know this particular person, maybe a hobby of yours that you're engaged with, but you hear this person is coming to town and they want to spend some time with you. So if you're into investing, you hear Warren Buffett's coming. If you are wanting to work on your golf swing, Scotty Scheffler is going to be here. You're an organizational business leader, you hear John Maxwell's coming, and they're willing to make time for you. And they say there's no charge. You can spend time with me. You can learn from me. And I promise you, I have a few tips for you on this particular area of focus. And I promise you will find yourself succeeding after the time. How many of you would in that moment say, you know what, my schedule's just too full? No, we would clear the calendar to lean in and listen. One thing I've found interesting about the Gospels and the disciples of Jesus is they rarely asked Jesus to teach them. They rarely asked him for advice. They knew they were walking with the greatest man who ever lived, the God-man. We talked about that last week. But they still lived under the illusion of their own competence. But there were a few times where they said, I have the wisest, smartest, greatest man that I'm following through life, I want to ask him about this. Only a few times. In the Gospel of Luke, these disciples leaned in around Jesus and they asked him this. They said, Lord, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray. What I find so interesting about this statement, this request from them, is they were Jewish boys, young Jewish boys. So they already were praying. Some say they were praying 3 times a day. Some say they were praying up to 7 times a day. They were already praying, but it was woven in their daily habits. But the real question these disciples were asking Jesus is, Lord, teach us to pray like you. Teach us to pray like you do. If you're like me, it feels like prayer is so hard to be a priority in our day. And I hope you can receive that as a confession of a pastor. So hard to pray. Sometimes it feels like I don't even know if I'm doing it right. This moment, this act I'm offering up these words, is it doing anything? You know, we don't really know. I don't know if you know the name John Cassis. He was a famous chaplain for the Chicago Bears in the glory days of the 80s. Any Chicago Bears fans here? Yeah, only a couple. It hasn't been good, has it? No. But Caleb's here, so we'll see. But John shared the story one time about Coach Ditka. Ditka comes in the locker room and he's about to give his pep talk to the guys, and he looks over at the refrigerator Perry, 338 pounds of pure man. And he says, Fridge, after I finish talking, I want you to come up and pray. And so Ditka begins his talk, and in the back of the room, Cassis, the chaplain, is sitting there with Jim McMahon, the brash, outspoken quarterback for the Bears at the time. And McMahon taps Cassis and says, Look at Fridge. Look, he's sweating bullets over there. And sure enough, Fridge, it just has a state of panic on his face. Like, what am I going to do when I'm asked to pray? And he taps Cassis again, and he says, I bet you $50 Fridge doesn't know the Lord's Prayer. Because Dick had asked him to give the Lord's Prayer. And Cassis is saying, what a weird moment. I'm the chaplain of the Bears, and I'm taking bets on prayer in the middle of a pep talk. Dick finishes. Fridge, will you come up? Fridge stands before everyone, and he begins to pray. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Cassis got a tap on his shoulder once again from McMahon. Here's $50. I didn't know the Fridge knew the Lord's Prayer. How do you and I become men of prayer in our day? It's, if we're honest, there are so many reasons why prayer is so hard for us in our day and this cultural moment we find ourselves. The first one I can think of is cultural. We live in a time, what some philosophers are calling the secular age, and don't be intimidated by that word. It just means we live in a time, they say 500 years ago, if you were talking to someone and you said you didn't believe in God back then, people would have looked at you with a third eye. Like, what's wrong with you? How do you not? But they're clearly forces outside of our control. They say now it's the opposite. So what's that mean for you and I? As one writer said, doubt is the air we breathe in the modern world. And what he means by that simply is this: when you pray, you will find yourself doubting sometimes. Is this going anywhere? Is there someone on the other end of the line? Am I just offering up these words? We find ourselves living in a day where doubt is the air we breathe. Second, prayer is hard because of our pace. You and I have learned that the only speed to operate with in the modern life is speed, the pace. One Wall Street Journal article was talking about, they said, you and I now in the modern world live on what they said, quote, a treadmill of pressure. I don't know who this morning feels themselves on a treadmill of pressure. I know I do. One writer, John Tyson, put it this way, quote, one of the greatest tragedies of modern life is the violent pace at which we are required to live. Almost every man I meet is scheduled to the hilt with calendars in which every nook and cranny is filled with tasks, end quote. One of the reasons prayer is so hard for us today, and maybe for you this morning, is we say in our souls, I just don't have time to pray right now. I have too many things to what? To do. I just have too much to do. If my schedule would somehow get cleared, if my calendar somehow made me more available, then I think I would be able to pray. But just the reality of prayer in our day, and with these devices, as much as I love them, is that everything gets maxed out in our world. Finally, another reason why prayer is hard is the ease in which we live in the modern life, the ease. Jesus, when they ask him, teach us to pray, and he gives them the Lord's Prayer, he says to them in the Lord's Prayer, he says this, he says, pray like this, give us our daily bread. Now, most of us in our modern world do not pray that way. Let me ask it this way. How many of you, when you woke up this morning, you prayed, Lord, please let there be coffee at Forge today? How many? If you're like me, you didn't even make coffee this morning because you assumed it's going to be there waiting for me in all of its glory. By the way, if we could, that coffee doesn't just get here. There are people in the room who serve us in that way. Jack, I know you. Can we say thank you to Jack and whoever else serves in that? Coffee is a vitamin. No, my guess is that nobody in this room prayed that prayer this morning. Lord, give us our daily cup at Forge. Now, please don't hear me wrong. I am quite happy to live in the world we live in. I'm thankful I don't have to walk 5 miles to retrieve fresh water. I'm thankful that when I want a burger, it just gets to me. If there are people out there like Don Lamo who actually do the work of making burgers, I'm so thankful I don't have to. I'm grateful for these blessings, but there is an ease to the modern life. As someone once said, we don't now pray for our daily bread, we DoorDash it. Given our issues, both inside us and outside of us this morning, I don't think I have to convince you that prayer is hard. I know there's some of you in this room that God has worked this discipline into your soul, and so in many ways you are our mentor, so I'm thankful for that. But for many of us, myself included, prayer just does not come naturally. And so this morning, I think we can lean into this discipline of prayer to hear these ways that Jesus wants to invite us into another kind of life with him. What does kingdom prayer offer us? First, it encourages us. Jesus gives the grand invitation in Matthew 7. He says this, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, it will be opened. I grew up with a father who had alcoholics for parents. And so in many ways, he was working through the demons of his past. Pete Scazzero has a great line. He says, Jesus may be in your heart, but your grandfather is in your bones. And I love that line. And what he means by that is we all have a story. We have a story of what we experienced growing up and how that has shaped each and every one of us. And part of my story and part of that being passed down through my family is I learned at a very early age, it all depends on me. That's the shadow I keep fighting in life. It all depends on me. It's an exhausting way to live. I advise you not try it. Can I tell you this morning, Jesus says there is another kind of life available to you if you want it. Jesus says we can just ask. You can just ask. Jesus, he says prayer encourages us that there is not this distant, absentee, disappointed, frustrated because you're interrupting him, God on the other end of the prayer. He says this Father is different. This Father is better. This Father leans in to hear from you when you cry out. He wants you to know, he wants to know what's going on. He wants to know what's bothering you. Jesus says this God wants to hear from you. Be encouraged this morning. You are not alone, that there is a Father who is good, infinitely good. He knows what he is doing, and he longs to hear from you. Second, prayer exposes. It exposes us. Now, you may be wondering, Tyler, that doesn't seem like much of an invitation to want to pray. But what prayer does is it has you keep small accounts and short accounts with God. Prayer exposes us to what Isaiah named about all of humanity, that each of us has turned to his own way. We've found something where we've kind of locked in and said, this is how I'm going to find life. This is what I'm going to pour all of my soul into. Prayer shows us our need for God's grace to intervene and sometimes wake us up from our apathy, sometimes expose kind of the places in our life where we have drifted. Expose the coping mechanisms that we may have taken on. We see this in Nehemiah's life. Nehemiah begins in chapter 1 of Nehemiah. He begins to pray for him, pray for the people, and immediately once he starts praying, he begins to confess. He immediately goes into confession. Maybe you're here this morning, you're part of a church that has a moment in your worship service that you offer confession. We do confession here at Orangewood. And that word confession is a beautiful, beautiful word. It comes from the Greek word homologeia. Homios, which is where we get the word homo, meaning same. And then logia, which is a derivative of logos, which means word. In verb form, it's to say or speak. So homologia, homologeo, means to say the same word. When you confess, what you're doing is you're saying the same word. You're saying, God, you are holy. And God, I am not. That's what confession is. Any sort of derivative of that, it's to say the same word. God, that you are holy, and God, I am not. Prayer exposes us in the most beautiful way. I confess to God he is holy. I confess to God that I'm not holy. Prayer allows us the space to see our need for grace and the awareness to not trust ourselves. To trust ourselves about as much as we trust Morgan and Morgan. Here's why we need the exposing power of prayer. Is because the sin in our hearts keeps us from seeing the sin in our hearts. Does that make sense? The sin in our hearts keeps us from seeing the sin in our hearts. And small compromises along the way slowly lead to large ones. I'll say it this way. I haven't met anyone yet in my ministry, someone who comes and confesses to me that they had a moment in their life where they woke up with another woman in their bed and they said, wait a minute, you're not my wife. Why? How did they get there? It's because small, slow compromises lead to large ones. I was talking with a friend of mine. He works with a large Christian organization here in the area. And part of his role is to kind of come behind people in that ministry who've had a moral failing, kind of flamed out and no longer involved. And his job is to come alongside them after this moment and really hopefully learn from their mistakes to serve those in the organization. I don't know how you begin that conversation over coffee. So Tom, tell me, how did you wreck your marriage and your life? But he said something interesting. He said, with each one of these conversations, they were shockingly and amazingly similar. The answers were they stopped praying. They went into cruise control. They made small compromise after small compromise. Maybe that's you this morning. Maybe God is inviting you into this kingdom warrior discipline of prayer to expose you in the most beautiful way to confession. To just be able to name, God, you are holy and I am not. Now, I know there are many different men in the room, and for some of us, that's what we need. We need to be brought to the end of our sufficiency. I need to be exposed. I need to confess. But I know others of you this morning, you come in this room absolutely insecure and defeated. Just worn down by life. Because life is hard. And it just keeps pressing in on you over and over. But this final invitation to prayer is prayer empowers you. I love the life of King David because he seemed like my kind of man. Like there was just dirt under the fingernails. Like he experienced every possible situation in his life. He knew the pain of life. He knew life was hard. And I want to share a quick story from his life with you from 1 Samuel 30. It says this. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but they carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. You thought you were having a bad week. David has returned to Ziklag. He has been on the run for his life up to this point from Saul, who's chasing after him to kill him. He arrives at Ziklag to find that all their wives, their children have been captured. They are taken into bondage. The city has been burned to the ground. He has these men who are following him. These are the men who rightfully believe he is the true king of Israel. They've been following him wherever he goes. They believe in him. They believe he's the king. They believe he's the one who's supposed to lead Israel. They've got David for president t-shirts on. They are ready. And we see these men are sobbing here, weeping and crying. And they wipe away their tears just long enough to look at each other with all the anger and frustration that has been building in their hearts. And they say, should we stone him? Should we just kill David while we're at it? I don't know about you. If I put myself in David's shoes, I would feel like such a failure. Discouraged, dejected. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've had your own Ziklag. Maybe you feel that defeat right now. Some place in your life is just like, wait, how did this happen? How did I get here? It says David is greatly distressed. This Hebrew word really means to be wrapped or tied up. Have you ever felt like that? Some situation in your life that you just felt inside tied up. Something in your life, you're looking at it and you're wondering, I have no clue how this is going to get solved. But prayer means there is always at least one option for you. In the most distressing of circumstances, in the most disappointment, when you feel tied up, you can pray. Listen to that final verse again. I'll read it in its entirety. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Guys, God wants to give you his power this morning. He wants to strengthen you with his power for every possible situation you are facing today or will face. You know who needed this power? Abraham Lincoln. As great as Lincoln's genius was, they say he was a genius, he was riddled by depression. He almost could not function in life. And recent historians have now verified accounts of some of Lincoln's own personal journey with his depression and where he looked to for strength. This is what he said when he was greatly distressed and troubled. I have been driven many times upon my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of all about me seemed insufficient for that day. Here's what I know, guys. Jesus is sufficient to meet us in the places, in the deepest recesses of our soul where we feel the most insufficient and weak. Prayer encourages us. Prayer exposes us. And prayer empowers us to face what lies before us not because we are strong, but because God is. Follow Jesus. Lean in and listen as these disciples did, and learn the power of prayer for your life. Let's take a time and talk around our tables.